So as we rejoin the game in round 14, neither goes well on the battle deck for the Americans. It's a drop of a level on one of the experts, which will be the medics, and for the Japanese, they failed a skill test, so they are low ammo for one round. That is no firing, and that's going to be a major impact as the Americans look to push forward. The Japanese platoon holding on in the centre under heavy pressure. 2 pins on them already. They've got heavy artillery coming down on them from the cruiser. They've got mortar rounds coming in on them. They've got canister from the stewards, and they've got machine gun fire. Over on the right flank, the Americans massing in preparation for their assault river crossing, and all preparation of that is going well. Looking through onto the bridge, the Japanese anti-tank guns still unable to see anything, and again the periscope providing excellent proof of what. So we rejoin the game in round 14. As you can see here on the right flank, the American Reserve Marine Platoon with its 2 Amtraks are now consolidating their position and getting ready for the assault river crossing. Immediately to the left, the slightly reduced lead platoon with only 1 Amtrak is pushing forward and holding the flank against the Japanese infantry platoon. One of the Japanese observation teams managed a reaction test and is swimming the river. Sadly, the SMT sniper, whilst having held off the Americans for 12 rounds, not so lucky, clearly not a good swimmer, and has drowned going into the water. In the centre, major problems for the Japanese. They took a fire from the HMG platoon. They took a lot of canister from the 3 remaining stewards and the supporting infantry platoon, and now I've got a double pin. Their intent with loss of ammo was to do a banzai assault on the half-strength machine gun and the company commander. However, they failed to lift the 2 pins and remain stationary, pinned down from direct and indirect fire, and currently this round without ammunition. No artillery support at all this round due to the low ammo card, and this has been a very challenging round for the Japanese indeed. So the Japanese in the centre, they're taking some 40 shots a turn from indirect and direct fire. This is causing major problems, and they've got 3 pins on them. They're not going anywhere fast. Big problems indeed. Japanese tried to play a card, double feed. However, the Americans passed the skill test, so no luck there for them. As you can see, everything seems to go in the American way at the minute. To add insult to injury, the final 0 goes in for another strafing run, takes 3 hits, fails to survive against 2 of them, and she's on her way down on fire, heading across the river, where she crashes just onto the home bank for the Japanese. However, that was one of the last major plays that they had at the minute. So round 16 proves particularly disastrous for the Japanese. You can see here the Americans getting ready in their line of departure for the assault river crossing. They continue to put more pressure on the Japanese platoon, which is holding on phenomenally. It did have 3 pins, did a miraculous, excellent rolling there. 2 of them taken off, but each round they're taking about 20 to 25 hits, but with them being dug in and in a very limited firepower penetration, with the exception of the naval guns, the Americans will find it very difficult to actually push them out. More than likely, they're going to get ready for an assault to clear this final position in hand-to-hand. Probably the biggest blow for the Japanese was the loss of the final air support, as the 0 came in for yet another gun run on the stewards, and she was taken down very quickly by their anti-aircraft guns on the rear of the turret. So as we get ready for round 17, still all to play for. However, it looks like the Americans are about to take the central position. Here we see the central platoon coming under huge pressure again on all flanks from both indirect fire, direct fire, canister, anti-tank guns, heavy machine guns, and it's not going well. And finally the Americans get some outstanding dice and get 4 hits straight through on bulletproof, and that is them routing the Americans. Now play a superb battle deck card. It's a double move with no penalties, which means that the Buck Roger reinforcement rocket launchers are going to double straight up the road and fire. This is going to be very challenging as the Japanese are under supreme pressure. The Americans pushing forward in the center, taking the logging camp, and really, not many options at this stage for the Japanese at all. The anti-tank guns now getting into position to get into a duel against the Japanese anti-tank guns on the home bank. This is going to be a precursor with the rockets coming in, so let's see what effect they have when they start bringing their fire to bear onto the Japanese home bank. Really, at this stage, it's all to play for the American. Well and truly into round 18. Very interesting as the Americans start to prepare for their assault across the river. What we have going on the American right flank is a duel between the American 37mm anti-tank guns and the dug-in Japanese anti-tank guns sitting up on the high ground looking back across the river. This is going to be quite important. If the Americans are unable to shift these guns, then they're not going to be able to get the armour across the bridge. Also, the Americans need to be careful. They're starting to bunch up due to the problems of getting an in-place force ready to give fire support for the assaulting forces down on the other flank. Given that the Japanese have been swept away on the home bank, this has triggered elements of the American reserves, and we see the Buck Rogers unit, as they're known, coming up with mobile rocket launchers, playing a native guide. This is going to get them a double move without any impact, so double move and straight into action. Again, extensive use of the periscope. This is taken from the American observers for the Buck Rogers onto the anti-tank guns across the river, proving that there is line of sight and the Americans call in a devastating bombardment on top of the Japanese home bank. That's covering. So round 18 sees the game really heating up. We've got the US rocket battery ranged in on the Japanese anti-tank guns on the ridge. Whilst dug in, they've got devastating bombardment down on them. Meanwhile, over on the opposite flank, we do see that we've got the smoke screen is down and the first of the Amtraks are making the assault river crossing. Here in the centre, we have the in-place force of the Americans supporting the right flank assault with anti-tank guns, infantry fire, and indirect fire support. The US will be bringing up shortly their AOP and hoping to get some direct air support onto the table as well. Let's move over now to the left flank, right flank as it is for the Americans, and see how that assault is starting to pan out. So we have the other forces waiting in place, laying down suppressive fire onto the far bank. The smoke screen now well developed, that has screened off the Japanese observer and the Japanese regimental guns, which again are of no use. Here from the Japanese position, you can start to see the Amtraks leaving the US bank. However, what the Americans have failed to pick up is a Japanese observer out on the extreme flank. Here we have him here, which yet hasn't been picked up, and he's going to be calling in some indirect fire onto these Amtraks, which could prove very challenging if any of them are hit in the water. So again, getting ready for round 19. Again, it's going to be very, very interesting. Can the Americans force their way across and establish some form of bridgehead on the Japanese side before the Japanese are able either to bring indirect fire or rush reserves to their position? Time will tell. So the Japanese, having played a superb battle deck card, get the 105 battery. She then gets ranged in, and they get a lucky hit on the Amtrak, knocking it out. This results in a skill test, a reaction test for each of the teams. That's going to take place in a minute to see how many actually wash ashore and how many are drowned. However, the other two Amtraks making good progress. They're just about to push through the smoke screen, and they'll end up going straight in against the Japanese regimental guns and the initial troops. This is going to be very interesting here on the right flank. In the centre, the fire support continues to come down, and the Buck Rogers, they've got to take a skill test, otherwise they're going to leave a smoke trail. Be interesting to see what happens there, and if the Japanese pick it up for counter battery fire, given the battery of 105s they've now got in addition. Over on the anti-tank duel, despite being hit, no casualties taken by the rockets. The Americans are losing this tank duel. They lost one anti-tank gun last round to the Japanese fire, and they're going to have to do something about that, perhaps smoke it off and push their infantry up onto the bridge. Going to be very interesting as we move into round 20. Okay, we pick the action back up again in round 20, and the Americans very fortunate, only losing two teams non-swimmers. The remainder are starting to swim ashore. The second half of the platoon with the Amtrak now pushing into the edge of the village and disembarking its troops. The other second platoon, they've only got one Amtrak, so she's unloaded the infantry, which have got the riverbank to navigate as an obstacle, and she's heading back now to pick up the other half of the platoon. Meanwhile, the US didn't pass their skill test, so we've got a smoke trail here. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with counter battery fire from the Japanese. On the plus side for the Americans, they have got the Corsair. It's coming in to support the anti-tank guns, and it's going to be doing possibly a rocket attack onto the anti-tank guns in their dug-in positions. Meanwhile, the AOP is now back in play, being pushed off some time ago by the Japanese Zeros, and it's hunting out the mortar platoon to put some indirect fire down onto them, aiding the American assault. Round 20 by no means over, probably about halfway through the game, whilst the Americans have made some good progress, knocking out two Japanese platoons, one infantry, one heavy weapons. They're only halfway into the Japanese defensive position. They've got major problems ahead in terms of some 3 or 4 Japanese infantry platoons supported by armour and this extremely strong defensive position. Not to forget, back in the rear, heavily dug into the mountain caves, are the Japanese 105 guns, which are going to wreak havoc as the American forces try and push across this bridge.